Good morning.
Good
Oh,
morning.
afternoon. It's noon. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Erica Ives, and I'm the CEO here at Mindful Path.
And I'm Stephanie Gilbert. I'm the program director here at Mindful Path.
And we are happy to be with you today. Today, we're here to talk about a really important topic, which is relationships during the pandemic. Relationships within the family, relationships within with significant others, relationships within the community, relationships with peers.
And Erica, I think COVID right now has served as a magnifying glass, if you will, on these relationships. So if you were having maybe really positive communication and feeling really good in relationships before, that might be magnified now. You might be feeling really supported versus if you're having some issues with the relationships or some troubles maybe communicating with boundaries, those are probably escalated as of now too with COVID and the stay-at-home orders.
Right. And we're hearing that families are either, really bonding during this experience with stay-at-home orders, spending so much time together, coming up with really unique ways to connect with one another. And they're also, like you said, there's a lot of stressors, being in close quarters all the time, parents who are having to homeschool, all types of things, spouses, significant others being together, so there's, a lot of pressure on relationships, good, bad, or indifferent.
And I think you bring a good point up with the pressures, the outside stressors
Yeah.
that are on relationships right now. I think one of the big ones this month is the back to school.
Right.
Depending on where you live in the country, maybe your child has the option to go back to school in person, and whether or not both parents are on the same page, even on those decisions. And
Right.
I mean, if you decide to keep your child home, then the relationship is completely different because now you're in the relationship as a teacher.
That's right.
When you were a parent. So that brings to
Weren't
mind.
You weren't trained to be a full-time teacher, so.
I wasn't, but most people aren't.
Right.
And that brings up the idea of, maybe the people that are finding this easier to navigate are the people who are practicing flexibility.
Absolutely. Rigidity during this time can be dangerous. However, structure is critical.
Yeah.
We all need structure in our lives. And so, yes, it's finding that, let's use the good old word, balance, right? And just to speak a little more to what you were talking about, you made such a good point about couples and it potentially creating conflict of sending their kids back to school. One being, yes, it's time, our kids need to be in school. The other one saying, no, it's not. There's too much infection out there. We're putting our kids at risk. We're putting us at risk. We're putting our extended family at risk, and so on. So navigating that right now, if you don't have the right support, could be so difficult. And so some of what we would like to do today is not only talk about this topic and have discussion and take questions, but also to provide some tips on some things that people can do that may be helpful for their mental health and their relationships during this time.
I wonder if we might start with just keeping the same topic of family and maybe some issues that people are seeing now in terms of not just with children, but for those that don't have children, for example, like the broader issue of communication. And issues, navigating the maybe tight quarters.
Right.
And now we need to communicate close to 24 hours a day versus before maybe you were only seeing your significant other 3 or 4 hours a day.
Right.
So I wonder if we might offer some issues that might be coming up around communication during this time with COVID and like how we need to negotiate this type of communication.
Right. And just quickly, though, to expand on that, some of the things that that I've heard, whether it's been clients or, people I know. I'm thinking of somebody recently who I was speaking with, and some of the problems they were having with their significant other is they wanted to bring a parent in to caretake them, because they didn't have anybody else to caretake them, and they're sick. Um, and so what does that do to the relationship? And so we're having to communicate around things that, you know, most of us have never had to communicate around, right? And so there could be a lot of real power struggles happening with couples. So
To interject though, I'm thinking also, especially in Los Angeles, not just couples are having to face this, but roommates.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Hmm.
people that maybe aren't as close and don't have that, kind of level of trust and intimacy, like having to
Hmm.
navigate this with a roommate who you may or may not know very well, depending on when you moved in with them.
Right.
I'm thinking especially people who just moved in with their
Right.
roommates
Right.
before COVID, and then you're having to negotiate this very personal issue of like bringing a family member in to take care of you.
Right. And then even further than that, with the roommate situation, what about when one is saying, I want to go out and I want to be with my friends. And the other one's like, well, you can't because that's not safe to bring back into our home. And then the conflict that can create too. Again, because this isn't anything we've ever done before. And so I think one of the thing I want to also say about this, I want to normalize it for people and say, you're not the only one experiencing this. You are most definitely not alone. This is going on across the world.
Yeah.
So, you know, others are experiencing it and you're not alone, and it's to be expected and it's normal.
Mhm.
Um,
With this level of anxiety and also fear underneath, I think for a lot of people, it's really easy to become escalated in that situation and feel
right,
threatened
right.
on a subconscious level when someone says, you know what, I'm going to go and go rock climbing,
Hmm.
with friends over the weekend. And that other person's like, no, we need to stay in the house
Hmm.
and quarantine, because now we're feeling like our safety is threatened. So
Right,
taking care of yourself too in ways, when you're talking about communicating with these people, because the person you're talking with may or may not equate the conversation to safety. But if
right.
you are, maybe it's time for a deeper level of communication about those issues versus like whether or not we're going to somewhere over the
Hmm.
weekend. That
Hmm.
makes sense.
Right. So there comes back, like you were talking about, with the communication and setting the boundaries, engaging in self care, and knowing what's right for you. And that is just so important. And with the roommates, also, the other thing that comes to mind, I was dealing with somebody recently, and you know they got COVID and had to tell, obviously, their roommate, their friends, anybody they were around. And I know it's a little off topic, but the amount of shame that is experiencing that is experienced, like, I'm hurting other people, this is my fault, so then there's like that piece on top of it, right? The shame, and then everybody's isolating in their rooms, and so it's a really difficult time. And so let's go on with that, on how do you communicate to people about this?
Well, I think when it's a issue like this too, Erica, I've had people mention this issue as well to me, and having to have these discussions with roommates. I think it's important to know that when you're when you're talking about something like an illness, the
Mhm.
person that's receiving that information may be reacting in a way that you feel like is centered towards you, but it's not. You're triggering possibly their own fear, their own anxiety, their own anger, maybe their own shame.
Right, right. And you
So,
have to be careful not to personalize that.
and also finding a person that you can talk with that maybe isn't in the dynamic, like a therapist or a friend or a family member that's out of the situation that can reflect to you from kind of an observer role.
Mhm.
Because if you're physically sick and you're having to tell someone else that you're sick, your defenses are already down.
That's right. You're already that much more vulnerable. You have that many more vulnerability factors that stand in your way to be not only an effective communicator, but to sort out your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences. And so I love that, finding somebody who's not in the situation, who's once removed, to talk about it with. Another one is um, taking some time. If you're not feeling up to maybe responding to something or engaging, to be able to say, you know what, I need a little bit of time. I need to remove myself from this situation for just a bit till I can sort out my thoughts. Because the last thing we want to do is communicate from a space of very heightened emotions, and maybe your thoughts become a little more irrational. So you want to communicate from a place when you're regulated, you're not going up and down, you're regulated, and you're in rational thought. You can be a whole lot more objective in that space. And so giving yourself permission, not only giving yourself permission, but communicating to whoever it is by saying, like I said, I need a little time. And you can also say to them, maybe we can set up a time where we can sit down and talk about this. And that way, each person has the time to prepare, the time to get themselves in a space to be able to potentially more effectively communicate.
Yeah. I talk about this with clients a lot in terms of responding versus reacting.
Right.
Probably heard me say that too. So getting to a place where you're not reacting from maybe a judgmental or shame-based or anxious-based response will actually help both parties.
Right.
So setting boundaries, some people are hesitant to set those boundaries, what you were describing. I always encourage people, I think it's the best situation for both people involved if you set those boundaries.
I agree.
And if someone's not willing to respect those boundaries, it's not because you set a poor boundary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's their stuff coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the time to, say, I hear you right now, but I really do need some space. And then I can come back to the conversation.
And that's something we should do in the context of relationships, friendships, whatever type of relationship, no matter what. So this is a practice, whether COVID is here or not. But COVID is definitely, I use the word, exacerbating this situation and making it that much more difficult to navigate and to effectively communicate. And like you just said, I'll say it in a little different words. So, we'll give people options to what resonates: being proactive instead of reactive. The reactive piece just does not work, because then you're left also with the stress of the conversation, right? So not only maybe what you originally feeling, but if it's not effective, then you have that added burden of what you experienced in the attempted communications that may have proved to be ineffective.
And these are really difficult conversations,
Oh,
Erica,
gosh,
too. So when we're
absolutely.
talking about, possible infection or, something else, it's not necessarily going to be a conversation where both parties leave feeling really good.
Right.
That's normal.
Right.
But taking care of yourself, so there's going to be an emotional burden with this conversation. So I'm going to do it when, I can engage in self-care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or, also speaking about COVID right now, being proactive, the word you use, is that much more important right now. Because if you're in a home, even with people you love, and you want to be around 24 hours a day, is a lot. And we all need
Yes.
some level of alone time. So setting
Yes.
those
Yeah.
boundaries a little bit. So, maybe it's as simple
Right.
as you take a walk by yourself, or you
Mm-hmm.
spend some time in the living room by yourself, and the other person goes into the, family room, whatever it is. we've not had to have these kind of conversations before.
Right. Right. It's all new.
But I come from a place of everything is worse if we don't talk about it. That's just me.
I know.
But
I love that about you.
so I'm an over communicator.
Yeah.
But at the very least, like, just let someone know, hey, I need some alone time. Just to
Yes.
recharge.
Right. And as we both know, it's also common courtesy and respect
Mhm.
for the other person, because they're potentially upset because they care.
Yeah.
Right. And to remember that. And the other piece, two other things I want to say.
Mhm.
Taking the time to remove yourself, and maybe you need to journal for a little bit. Maybe that's when you need to make that phone call to somebody else to talk to them. Maybe you need to do some deep breathing. Maybe you want to get up and dance and listen to some music and exert some of that, energy, that negative energy first. So there's lots of different things that you can do. But then the other relationship that really is so important is a relationship with yourself, right? That
Yeah.
we refer to that as intrapersonal. Intra within self, interpersonal is with somebody else. So that relationship of I'm thinking of somebody who I've been working with who, was diagnosed with COVID, and the experience they were expressing to me was, I'm infected. I feel dirty. I'm sick. I know I could potentially hurt somebody else with what's happening within me. I'm a danger to others. I'm not only safe in the world now, but I'm not only safe within myself, right? I don't deserve to be around anybody else. Like, am I ever going to be around anybody else? And so that relationship with yourself, that's where it starts. That's the most important relationship to work on, to be able to effectively work on those interpersonal relationships.
And what's coming up for me in that, in being really kind, maybe if you're working in the relationship with yourself and the way you speak to yourself, like examining where those beliefs come from.
Right.
Because this is a pandemic and this is most of what's on the news right now. So of course we're going to internalize those things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
even when you are encouraging people to, spend some time maybe journaling or dancing, like that's all keeping the relationship with yourself. Like I was just speaking with a friend and we were talking about losing the time driving from work back to home each day. And I hadn't really thought about it before, but it is a time. I mean, most of us are in the car, maybe by ourselves. And when we drive to and from work, what are you doing? Are you listening to music? Are you listening to podcasts? Are you talking on the phone to friends and family? That's time we essentially lost alone time to decompress maybe
Good
before.
point. Good point.
So setting something up with yourself where you're still spending some time with yourself.
Checking in with yourself.
And I wonder too, Erica, in talking about family, also I've heard people struggle with boundaries with different family members outside of the home, like whether or not they'll go visit in person, if they think no one is sick. Maybe there's a family celebration where the expectation is to come in person, and some family don't feel comfortable doing that. And do they even feel comfortable saying it, or are they going to go against what they feel like is best for them?
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. People maybe not even having, I don't want to use the word courage, or maybe they just don't know how to stand up for themselves. And we refer to that as being assertive, right? Having your voice, knowing what you need, holding your truth. It's very different than being aggressive, which can have a more combative nature to it, but being assertive. And the other thing, like you were talking about being kind to yourself, we want people also to be empathic with others and compassionate with others. And by empathy, just a short definition, like being able to step into somebody else's experience. and say, I imagine this might be really hard, and really trying to be there, but not only being compassionate and empathic towards others, but there goes the intrapersonal relationship again, self-compassion,
Mhm.
right? That's so important and it gets missed.
Absolutely. And I think it's always good to remember too, like what's best for you might not be best for the other person.
Mhm.
So a fear that I've heard in having those more assertive conversations is, what if it comes up judgment as I'm being judgmental to my family or friend for not doing the same as I'm doing? So there's where that empathy can come in. And how would you like to receive this information if you were the other person?
Great
I
point.
statements,
Great point.
um, really talking in a non-shaming, non-judgmental way. Even if I'm saying to you, for instance, like, Erica, I would really love to be there on that day, but I don't feel comfortable for me and my health. So I would love to join via Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Like something like that, where the person doesn't feel like you don't want to spend time with them,
Right. Right.
but sharing how you can spend, how you both might feel comfortable sharing time.
Right. So also that brings up the word compromise. Coming up with compromises where both people can feel like their needs are being met as much as possible. The I was thinking also, and I know we're going to talk about boundaries, but I was thinking about something too that um, I know is happening with a lot of people. Um, so a parent whose child gets sick, and child meaning any age, because you're always somebody's child, right? So, having to care for a loved one, and that extremely helpless feeling and that terrifying feeling, and how do you manage your own anxiety around that, because the person who has COVID is already having a tremendous amount of anxiety, right? Fear, possibly even depression. And we want to be sure that we don't take our own stuff, and we call that project, put it on somebody else, right? Because they already have their own stuff to deal with. So that goes into that boundary. Let's tie that in, about managing your own stuff, to be sure you're not projecting that onto the people you care about most, because they already have their own stuff to deal with. Everybody has their own stuff to deal with. Children have their own stuff to deal with, right? And parents are sitting talking about all their stuff, but what about these kids? What about their fears? What about what they're experiencing? Thought about going back to school, they're scared too, right? They're excited, they're scared, they don't know how to navigate these feelings. So we just have to be really conscientious in setting boundaries too, on saying, this is my stuff. I don't need to put that on you.
Yeah.
Right.
And that doesn't mean shove it down and don't
No,
feel it.
no.
That just means let it out a different way.
That's right. That's right.
And, maybe an alternative to projection is maybe you do have a conversation about feelings in a very maybe more generic, for lack of a better word, way. Because I would assume, if it's a situation where your child is sick and maybe the child is older, or even an adult, and the parent is there, I'm sure everyone's sharing some of the same fears.
Yeah. And so
To talk
connecting on
about,
those
yeah,
versus having them pull you apart.
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah.
No. Yeah.
And when you mentioned, like child, your child could be out of the house. And so then if they're sick, you can't even see them. You talk about a helpless feeling. You can't do anything to take care of them except be there for them emotionally. So that's why, right? You really want to check in with yourself. And I love what you're talking about, we need to connect, because we're experiencing so much of the same thing, and in so many ways it's so unfortunate. We're not getting into politics on this Facebook, or probably any Facebook. That's not what we do, right? But politics is very divisive right now, and there could be divide within your home, and politics is feeding the COVID virus right now. So that's another factor too, is communicating around politics. And remember, all you parents out there, remember, even though you may not think your kids are listening, they are. They listen, and then they interpret it in the way they interpret it. And every kid is different. So, if you're going to have those adult conversations, please make sure that you're sensitive about your children and those who are in the surrounding areas. Just on a side note.
Absolutely. And take the time to have conversations with them, because maybe you're thinking that they don't know and you don't want to bring it up, but they probably already know.
Mm-hmm.
And to talk on their level in a way that they understand, so that their imagination isn't running away and they're spiraling in fear too.
Right.
You brought up, because I just want to circle back, you touched on the politics, but I think it brings up a good point about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you have a family member or close friend who's sick,
Mm-hmm.
boundaries around news. So boundaries around, because I also feel like in addition to the politics of it, there's a kind of current of judgment.
I'm just turning on this light. Keep going.
Yeah. Depending on what your beliefs are, I see in the news sometimes there's a tendency to judge others for what they're not doing,
right,
according to us.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do have someone who's ill, really setting some boundaries. So if you're getting news, you're getting it from reputable sources, and you're not watching it for hours a day and feeding your fears and anxieties.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So setting those boundaries and taking care of yourself.
Right. Steph, can you maybe, for people who may not know, can you define this word boundaries?
Sure. an image always comes to mind, Erica.
What is it?
It's a good question. Like a fence.
I like that.
So, but a fence that, and to see it, it's a fence that's like with wooden slats that opens and closes. So it's not rigid like a wall. It's not completely porous that like you can just walk over it and jump over it and they don't have to necessarily respect it. Mm-hmm. You have the option to open, close it as far as you want to.
I like that. It's permeable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And it's flexible. Yeah. And it's open, but not too open. Yeah. Right. And I also think of boundaries, like we have physical boundaries holding our physical space. We have emotional boundaries. We might have, spiritual boundaries, just so boundaries around different, you can break it down too, because it's such a big concept. So knowing like what's okay for you, what feels good for you, but not only that, checking in to see if maybe your boundaries might be a little too rigid. So just because of your boundaries, you still have to assess them if they're working for you, but they're working for you in a beneficial and healthy manner, right? Because some people have such closed boundaries that they don't let people in. And some people have such open boundaries that they get really, really taken advantage of, right? And some people just have really blurred boundaries. And so, those permeable ones that are able to be open. I love the wooden fence image, and imagery is so helpful. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Absolutely.
So the boundaries.
Just to add, healthy boundaries do fluctuate.
That's right.
So it's not that we say, okay, this is, I have healthy boundaries and this is the way it's going to be forever. Especially when we're talking about a pandemic, our physical boundaries have changed.
Oh,
absolutely. That's probably the one that we see the most right now. And your relational boundaries are going to change.
That's right.
Because we're simply limited in what we're doing right now. So seeing what feels good to you and taking the other people into account somewhat too.
Yeah, and getting to know them and having these conversations on what's okay and what's not okay for them. And is that working in the context of the relationship? And if it's not, how do we shift that?
Exactly.
So, yeah, so these relationships are all over the friendships, the significant others, the relationship with our society, with our communities, like we need our communities right now. And unfortunately, there is a lot of divide. Um, so you want to really keep as close as possible.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, with those who you care about and love and care about you and love you.
Mhm.
Just the safe people.
Absolutely. And, going back to school, when you were talking about it at the beginning, like, kids and or young adults going to school and their community of fellow classmates, that is a lot different than it was 6 months ago. So building time to have kids create their own community via Zoom most of the
Right,
time now, and
right.
play. There's some wonderful games. My nieces and nephews play these games with their friends via Zoom now, and they have Zoom play dates and things like that. But those are important because then they keep that sense of community, and you feel like you belong.
Hmm.
In a greater sense than family structure, like
That's right.
our community and our society. So they
Mhm,
haven't
mhm.
they haven't left. They just look a lot different right now.
That's a good point. Good point. Do we have it? I think we had some questions come in on our
I
web.
wrote a couple of questions down, Erica, that I got from our website. Okay, so one we talked about, but you might briefly go over it again. How do we communicate if you are a person that is infected with COVID? How do we communicate with our family and friends? Possibly that you might need to tell someone that they're at risk, or that you yourself are sick and that that person's probably going to worry about you instantly.
Right. And, I was recently speaking to somebody about this who was really conflicted and, said, I don't want to tell anybody because I know the way I got it and it was not okay. I was irresponsible and I acted irresponsibly. So they walk into the initial conversation with shame. So I think that that's the starting piece is that again, that intra personal, like how are you feeling about being sick? What is your experience? What are your fears, right? And then, I want to say if it feels too overwhelming, you can ask somebody to help you. You can ask another friend to help you. Can you help me contact these people? And then, how do you say it, right? Like, how do you tell somebody, we were together a few days ago and I tested positive, you know? And honestly, that's exactly what you say. You I think it's really important initially, if you can. Now I don't want people to cut off from their emotions, and I'm not by any means. I think you all know that as therapists, I'm about connecting with your feelings, right? But I think that with this situation, it might, not for everyone, never across the board, but it might be more helpful for people to stick to the facts. And again, assessing what's happening for you so that maybe you can work on putting it over here and you could pick it up after, right? And it doesn't mean emotions might not come after you say it, but initially sticking to the facts. I got a test, I'm COVID positive, and we were together recently. And that's the facts. That's just non-negotiable facts.
No. And I think the truth is the person really just needs the facts.
That's right. That's right.
They're not in a position where they can necessarily take care of your emotions because now they're going to have their own emotions.
And it might be met with anger, and it might be met with fear, and it might be met with compassion. You don't know what's on the other side, even if you know the person so well. You don't. So there will be a follow-up conversation. And you can also say, I'm going to give you this information, and then I'm just going to have to I need a little time and then I want to reconnect and hear how this affected you. So there it is again about being able to set a boundary for yourself. But we do have responsibility to others to let them know. It is crucial. It is respectful, and it is important for everybody for the spread and to get this thing contained.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, checking in with yourself first, being able to stick to facts, picking up your emotions, setting boundaries for yourself to remove yourself if needed, and then come back to be able to be there for that person as well. And then talk about that more.
And I think that many of the same principles too, if you're telling your family members that you weren't necessarily in proximity to, but telling family members, parents, loved ones, partners, brothers, sisters, that you are sick and knowing that they're going to worry about you. So creating some boundaries, whether they're like daily text check-ins or whatever they are, or daily FaceTimes for 5 minutes, because the person is sick and they're having to cope with that, and then they're having to cope with the family kind of wanting to know every detail, which is completely understandable.
Right.
So balancing everybody's needs is really important, and I think direct communication is.
Me too. And self-care.
Yeah. Everyone needs it, not just the person's.
That's right. That's right. Right.
And the other question, we touched on this too, but maybe we can talk in more detail since someone asked this. How do you tell friends or family members you don't feel comfortable seeing them in person?
Again, I'm going to go back to that direct communication, but also just, making sure you understand, first of all, your reasoning, why you're not comfortable. So, I'm afraid to get sick and potentially infect the people I love and I care about. And I honestly think that sometimes that's enough to say.
Yeah.
I have responsibility to myself and those around me. And then you can also say, it doesn't mean I don't want to be with you. Right. And there's like the compassion. I want to be with you. I want to spend time with you. I miss you. This is hard. This is painful. This pains me to make this decision, but this is the right thing to do. And just holding your truth, but also understanding your reasoning, and being able to communicate that.
And I think too, to hold that boundary and not deviate.
Right.
We can get into a lot of emotional conversations, and it's not about the person themselves and whether they feel safe enough. Well, they feel safe enough to be around, if that makes sense. It's not a personal, I don't want to be with you decision, but it can feel that way for some people.
Oh, right.
And
because we're already lonely. Yeah. We're already lonely. So yes, it's more likely to feel like that.
So really staying on message and also not feeling pressured to do something that you don't feel comfortable with. I would say honoring across the board. Yeah. Not getting into the politics of it, really just what's best for you. You've decided that in advance, and giving that information to another person. And if it gets really heated, you can always say, go back to what you said earlier about the other conversations. You know what, I really want to talk to you about it. I think we're getting to a place where we can't really talk anymore. We're getting rather emotional. Let's set a time to talk again.
Some people take that as like, you want me to set up an appointment with this person to talk to them? And I'm like, yeah, I do, because that's respecting each other and the relationship so you can show up in the best way possible. Yeah. And then your outcome is more likely to be positive. It may take conversations, but it's just more likely.
And this might be too therapist-y for some people, but I look at it as like, you're important enough to me for me to set time aside for you, be very intentional. So I'm not going to be doing other things. I'm not going to be talking while I'm cleaning the house or at the grocery store. Like, I'm going to be focused solely on you.
Yeah. Intentional. Very important word. Intentional.
Somebody actually commented. So Ryan said 2 thoughts. It's like having a conversation about STDs. So yes, This is very similar. People are having to
Sure,
have these
sure.
types of conversations.
That's right.
If you have had those kind of conversations or feel comfortable talking about different kinds of illnesses, I would say this is probably something that comes more easy to you. Maybe not, but some people don't. So this might be the first time you're practicing that skill.
Right. And what Ryan said, I actually thought about it. There is sort of, I've thought about this before you mentioned it, Ryan, that there is there's like this kind of similar nature in it in regards to like the shame too, right? But no matter what, these are difficult conversations.
Yeah. And the second thing was their whole what sort of safety measures you're putting in place while the person has symptoms. It's very scary to go through and it can take a turn quickly. So it is a lot for people to deal with.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fear. Another thing along the same lines is having conversations maybe about different illnesses. I've thought of this in terms of maybe parents who have a child going through cancer.
Yeah.
And the same fears that may be coming up. So taking really care of yourself if these conversations seem like conversations you've had in the past.
Great point. Great point.
Yeah. So, and that was the comment from Facebook.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so important stuff. As we tell you, we're here. And if we can provide any support for anybody out there, please reach out to us. You can email us at info@mindfulpath.com. Our email address is mindfulpath.com. And just like reach out if you, Facebook, and we'll be here same time next week.
Yeah.
We apologize for having to cancel last week. We had an emergency come up and unfortunately didn't have a choice. So I apologize about that, but we'll be back.
Next week, I think we're talking about mindfulness.
Yeah.
So something about mindfulness.
I'm really looking forward to that one too. And we'll be giving some direct examples on how to do it within the Facebook Live. So yeah. So if you have any questions, please reach out, and we wish you the best, and please stay safe. Please stay well, and we will speak soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.